Good morning or good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Customer Driven Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. James Killian. I see we have some audience here, so really appreciate you all joining us. And I'm really excited to welcome my second guest of 2026 to the podcast, Mr. Erik Vogel. Welcome, Erik. Thanks for being on.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me join.
A pleasure. Always great to talk with you. So Erik and I are recovering Qualtricians. So we were both at Qualtrics during the crazy ride that happened from around 2018 to 2024. Erik has since moved on to start his own company. So he's now Chief Executive Officer of VistaXM Incorporated, and we're going to let him tell you a little bit more about what that actually means. But as a CEO, he spearheads the company's global go-to-market strategy and revenue growth, works with the sales and operations team, of course, and also is elbows deep in product management as well. So Erik and I have known each other for quite a few years, but he brings considerable expertise over 30 years across technology, services, and he's got quite a track record of innovation. So Erik, you were previously at HPE, if memory serves correct, and you also were in leadership roles at Cisco. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, and he is heavily educated with an MBA from Carnegie Mellon and also his law degree from University of Pittsburgh and also mechanical engineering. So that's quite an eclectic background that you got there, Erik. And I know you've also spent some time as a faculty there in the Salt Lake area. Thanks for being on the show. So I'm really excited to talk with you and for everybody who's joining or who will be watching. One of the reasons that I was really interested in speaking with Erik is because of his expertise. He and I have seen some of the same patterns out there with respect to it can't just be about technology, right? I mean, I mentioned this on some of our podcasts in the past, and of course, everybody's a fan of technology because it allows us to scale, it allows us to move faster, but the reality is tech by itself just doesn't get the job done. You actually need brains and a little bit of muscle and finesse to actually activate the technology. So, Erik, you and I have talked about the run of show, and you know that I have bookends. I always start and finish the same way. And so my first question to you is the same one that everybody gets. A leader, team, or company is customer driven when what? Please finish that sentence.
Yeah, I love that question. First off, I always like to tell people, if you have to ask the question. So when we talk to companies and they want to know, hey, should we consider ourselves customer centric? Are we, customer focused? And I always have to tell them, if you're asking the question, the answer is no, you're not. In our opinion, we think about customer centricity when you're really looking at every interaction that a customer has with the brand. And a lot of times, we think about experience as being, well, after they're a customer, we have to take care of them. We have to provide great customer success and customer support. But in reality, experience begins that very first marketing outreach. It could be an event. It could be, a cold call from a seller. That is an interaction, and every single interaction you have to understand is influencing the perception of that customer towards your brand. And really, the customer evaluates you on all of those experiences to determine whether you're fulfilling the brand promise. So when I think about, is a customer, is a company customer centric? Are they truly living that? Are they thinking about every interaction? And are they evaluating themselves against all those touch points against the brand, not just selected ones where they're after their customer or before a renewal or when they call into a help desk or a support center, but are they really thinking about the entire set of customer interactions? We refer to as the journey, but it really matters. You have to be thinking about every interaction along that series of transactions that a customer has with you.
Wow, I love that answer. That is, as I would have expected coming from you, Erik, incredibly detailed, and there's a lot to unpack in that. That really resonates with me because, and for the audience, I think generally speaking, I think Erik and I have sat as one side of the same coin. So you spent most of your career on the CX or customer experience side of
That's
the
right.
equation, and I mostly on the EX or employee experience side of the equation. And I love that answer because one of the things that I always talk with my clients about is that we talk about employee experience, and in a lot of cases, as we all know, that tends to be synonymous with employee engagement, which is important, but employee engagement is not the only, box to check for having a comprehensive employee experience, right? And you talking about the minute that a sales call happens, that's creating the first experience, the first impression that really leads you down a path, right? It's all a big decision tree. I often talk about the fact that it is the moment you reach out and touch a brand enthusiast as a prospective employee, as a candidate, that it's really important that you do that right, because if you don't, then you're setting an expectation of what it's like to work here, and you want to
Right.
make sure that you're doing that in the best possible way. Really, really great response to that. I think that's the most detailed one that I've had thus far. So thank you. You and I haven't really talked about how we got into the experience management business in a lot of detail. So maybe we'll unpack that one as well. One of the things that I like to ask people just to get that ball rolling is, do you have a good example of a bad experience, maybe as a customer, or maybe something you witnessed, or maybe something that you saw for one of your own clients, maybe, that really shaped how you think about experience management?
Oh, I think we all have those examples, and we could all
Yeah.
rattle off hundreds of those examples. And the reality is, right, we tend not to remember, just as humans, we don't tend to remember the good experiences because we take those for granted, and that's the expectation. And what we remember are those bad experiences, and that's why we talk about one bad experience will turn a customer off of a brand for life. They will forget the 100 great experiences.
Mhm.
We love to talk about cell carriers, for example. The phone showed up in perfect shape. It was easy to authenticate. I was able to get it set up. Everything migrated to my new phone perfectly. And, it's been a great phone for 2 years. All of a sudden, there's an error on my bill for $7. And I call a help desk or a contact center and I can't get through to somebody, or they have an accent I can't understand. And just like that, I have forgotten 2 years of great experiences because one bad experience. And I will switch carriers as a result and never come back because of that one $7 bad experience. And so I think we all have lots of those examples. We see them every day in real life. And unfortunately, because of that, we do see a lot of lost revenue opportunity. We see a lot of what we call blindside churn in our business because it just takes that one negative experience. One that really stands out to me, and it's a really simple example. I have a neighbor who's a dentist. And if you live in the Salt Lake area, there's a lot of dentists. I don't know why, but there are a lot, and they
You
they
got great
compete
teeth, Erik.
heavily.
You really do. Great
Well,
smile.
thank you. Well, thank you. And I wish the lighting was better in here. I apologize. I'm in a conference room at a company EBC, and they have the automatic lights that turn on and off, and I'm sitting too far from the automatic light switch, so it turned off on me here. So I just got the window light. But my neighbor's a dentist. He competes heavily for business, and they rely a lot on Google reviews. And he was telling me that he was getting a lot of negative reviews. And interestingly, it wasn't about him not being a good dentist or not taking care of his patients, or they were very happy with the work they did. He's low pain. People talk about he's a very gentle dentist, which is great. What they were complaining about was the magazine selection that he had in the waiting room. They were old. The crossword puzzle book was fully completed. There were no crossword puzzles to work on while they were waiting. And he was starting to see a number of negative reviews in Google reviews. And a lot of people, they'll use that to select the dentist. They'll see a bunch of one-star reviews. They won't read the detail. Well, the book was full. There were no crossword puzzles to do. They were out of Sudoku puzzles. So I had nothing to do while I was sitting there. That was the complaint. So that was the bad experience. And it actually impacted his revenue because it reduced the number of new patients he was able to get because of those negative reviews. So is that really a bad experience? If you're going to the dentist, he's doing a great job on your teeth, that's what you expect. But again, you've got to look at every touch point and every interaction with the brand. And unfortunately for him, that is still an interaction with the brand. I think sometimes we think about it being our core, well, do they love the product? Are they happy with the product? But we've got to be thinking about every single interaction, and any one of those interactions can have a very negative consequence if we don't track it, if we don't measure it, if we don't monitor it and keep abreast of that, because it just takes one bad experience, one $7 mistake on a bill that will push a customer away and push them to another brand. And that's revenue erosion, and that's lost customers.
Yeah, that's great. I love that perspective, and you're right. And I think that just a personal example for me, my wife and I over the weekend got away early Valentine's Day retreat to Palm Springs, and in my book, Obsessed: Cultivating the Customer-Driven Leader, I give the example of the Ritz-Carlton as being very customer driven, right? Because they actually enable and empower their employees to make contact with a guest, to look for that vibe of consternation or frustration and lean into it and help the guests close that gap so that they can continue to have a good experience. And I use the Ritz-Carlton as a really great example. In this case, a much needed vacation, I might add, started with us getting there early, but the room was not early as it was promised. And in fact, we waited for over an hour before it was ready. When we got to the room, the wrong luggage had been delivered. That same evening, we had to call security on a drunken underage teenager who was harassing us at the hot tub. We waited for an hour for a very cold cheeseburger to be delivered poolside, and each and every time. And here's the thing, right? Those are experiences along the way, and those things contribute, right? They are layers that can add up in a good way or add up in a bad way. And in this case, I'm a seasoned traveler, so things happen. I mean, you just have to appreciate that. So it's how things get handled that I think is really, really important. And in this case, what was particularly frustrating to us was each and every interaction that we had with a hotel staffer, they said, "We're going to make this right. We're going to give you some credits on your Marriott rewards points, or we're going to take something off the bill for you." And we heard that each and every time, but nothing happened. So am I never going to stay at a Ritz-Carlton again? No, because I generally have good experiences. But did it take the brand a notch down for me? Absolutely it did. Absolutely it did. So just by way of story there. So one of the things that I think about, in that situation, right, and in the situation that you described was, as I mentioned in the intro, technology is omnipresent. I mean, it is there. It is constant, right? Technology didn't do squat to make my experience better in that circumstance, right? So you and I have talked about this extensively, and we both have noticed that a lot of EX and CX programs or experience management programs are finding themselves in a state of failure today. Now, I have my own ideas and opinions and hypotheses about why that is, but I'd like to give you the mic and hear from you. Why do you think that is? What are you seeing? What's VistaXM doing about it?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think that the SaaS providers in the space have really done a disservice, because I think the message that the SaaS providers came out with was, hey, buy our technology and you can have a customer experience program, right? Start sending surveys and voila, right? Magically, customers are going to love you. And that is simply not the case. And honestly, that's a big part of why we started VistaXM. So a little bit on my background, I built a CX program for a large OEM technology company. I was a Qualtrics customer, Qualtrics power user for a number of years, and then moved to Qualtrics and helped other technology companies get their programs up and running and working. And so I got to work with a lot of the large technology companies, brands we all know, brands like Autodesk and Adobe and IBM Global Services, and really help them get their program running. And what was painfully obvious was it wasn't just the tech, it was the people. It was the process. It was the playbook. It was the methodologies that they used. They were able to bring in at ServiceNow a guy named Matt Lombardi, for example, and Emma Sapogieva, who were experts in customer experience on top of using the Qualtrics platform, but they knew how to run these programs. You see that across all of these leading tech companies where, yes, they're using Qualtrics or a good SaaS platform, but at the same time they've got the people who have the method, the process, and the capability. And we started VistaXM to address that gap essentially that exists, what I call mid-market. So as you start to look at smaller firms, they don't have the luxury of hiring 10 people, 20 people, CX experts, right?
Sure.
A lot of times these programs get pushed into marketing departments or operations type departments or even IT. Because it's a software platform. So IT runs these programs and they don't have the skill set, they don't have the background, they don't have the capability to really do it well. So we started VistaXM as a managed service where we bring all of that to our customers. And we're solving for these specific cases where people want the benefits of a great experience program. They want to be able to listen to all these touch points and understand what's happening. And probably most importantly, understand what to fix and what to improve. But they just don't have, I hate to say people, process, technology, but that's the problem. Technology turns out to be the easy part of the equation, right? There's a lot of good technology out there. And now with AI, we're seeing it all over the place, but all that's giving you is more signal faster. You still have to understand how to interpret that signal, how to take action on that, how to prioritize. One of the things we are very big on at VistaXM is the prioritization. Not uncommon if, people listening to this, if they have a CX program, where a CX team can come back with 50, 60, 70 insights, right? 70 recommendations. Here's 70 things we need to go fix. So they'll take, go over to the contact center and say, okay, here's 6 things you need to work on. And they'll go to the product team and they'll go to the engineering team and the pricing team and they'll say, okay, go fix this, go fix this. And of course, these teams are saying, well, take a number, right? I already have a list of 100 priorities. I'm just going to add these to it. Yeah. And then at the end of the year, people wonder why nothing's fixed, right? And why nothing has happened with those insights. So when we see really successful programs, when you look at the industry leaders, what they're very, very good at is saying, yeah, there are 75 things we could do. What are the 2 things we must do? And let's prioritize and let's figure out those 2 or 3 things that from an ease and impact analysis, which is the method we use, but however you want to stack rank them and sort them, but let's go find that 2 or 3 things. Let's go take action on those. Let's improve those things. We have the solid business case to back it up. And then when we're done, we're going to track the value. We're going to show how that's impacted churn, how that has impacted net new customer wins, or how that's impacted expansion. Because when you're able to do that, you can start to build that cycle. Where, okay, now let's go take the next 1 or 2 top priorities and then take the next 1 or 2. And you're constantly listening, constantly bringing in signal, coming up with those insights, stack ranking those insights, picking the top ones, executing on those, tracking, proving the value. So the business gets behind it and you get these teams behind it where it's not I'll take a number, I'll get to it when I get to it, but they see the benefit and say, yeah, this is a priority. Then you do it again and you do it again. And it really mirrors the old plan, do, check, act cycle we talked about 30 years ago in quality management circles. It's the same idea. It's just we're improving the quality of the customer interactions and the customer experience we deliver.
Yeah, that's a great response. Say a little bit more about that ease of impact analysis. You and I may know what that is, but it's not a phrase that's actually thrown out a lot. And so I think that would be beneficial to just, get a little bit beneath the surface on that one.
Yeah. So what we find, again, there's no shortage of insights that are generated. And with AI, we're just getting more of them. So if you're confronted with a list of 100 things that you can go and improve, how do you determine, all right, look, we can't do all 100. And the industry leaders do this all the time. They say, look, we're not going to work on 100 things. We're not going to spread ourselves. How do we find 1 or 2? And so we use, this is an old McKinsey model, ease and impact, where you take all of the opportunities that you have, all of the insights. And the first thing you want to understand is how easy is it to implement? Some things are really easy, right? It's like, hey, we just have to, improve the messaging on the website. I can get the digital team to do that. When I was at HPE, we had an issue where we had a brand new digital experience, and we expected customers to come in, and first thing we thought they'd learn about the service and the solution, and then they'd want to get a price for the solution. And so they'd go to a pricing tool where they could get a price. And we saw very early on about 80% were dropping on the first page, that they were never working, they weren't going through the journey to get to the ultimate pricing. And when they generated a price quotation is when we captured that as an opportunity, because now we knew who they were, we had their email address, and we could follow up. And so, but 80% were never even going 2 or 3 clicks deep in the digital experience. So we immediately put some listening in place. And what we heard from that customer was, hey, we think you're too expensive, and we're not going to invest our time learning about your experience or your solution until you convince us otherwise. So the aha moment was, well, put pricing on the front page. Don't hide it in the back. So we just had the digital team put a little box on the front page that said prices starting at, and here was a little comparison table between what we were offering in Amazon and Azure and Google Cloud were offering, price per terabyte, price per core, price for whatever. Here's our price, here's their prices, right? Basic. But that was enough. So that was an easy fix, and that generated 15 million of net new pipeline in the first month, right? So huge impact. So the first thing we looked at was ease, and we said, yeah, some things are like, well, you got to implement a new version of SAP. Well, that's hard, right? That's a big thing. But putting a little pricing table on the front page of a website took 2 days, right? Easy. And then the flip side is you look at impact, right? What's the business impact? And some are going to have, outsized impacts. But others, maybe they're smaller, but they're easy and quick to do. So you get those quick wins. And so we're a firm believer in, you've got to map them both. It's not always the big impact items. And it's not always the easiest ones, but when you rank them together across those 2 dimensions, you're looking for the ones that essentially sit in the top right quadrant, which are the ones that are easiest to do with the best business impact. And you pick those off first, because that's how you build momentum, right? You can go do tough things that are going to take you 12 and 18 months, but you'll find that these programs start to stall pretty quickly. People start to question the value. We've heard this many times. Like, well, what are you doing? But if you can go get wins that you can do in 2 weeks and generate 15 million of that new pipeline 30 days later, that's an easy thing to do that generates a very good return. So that's what you're looking for. You can call them no regret moves, low hanging fruit, whatever you want to call them, but that's the model. And when you take 100 and you're ranking them relative to each other, it doesn't have to be perfect. Everybody always asks me, well, are you going to go build out a plan for each one of these? No, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's directional in nature. And that is good enough, because again, you're just trying to understand which ones sit in sort of the top right bucket, and then you can refine further from there. But it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to, kind of think of them all relative to each other. How easy is it to be, is this one relative to the other 99? What's the potential business impact relative to the other 99? And then you plot them on that XY graph. And really those key opportunities will jump right out. And that's where you want to focus. Go after 1 or 2 in that top right quadrant. Once you start putting wins on the board, it's amazing how it starts to fuel these types of programs. All of a sudden, there's more investment, there's more dollars, there's more excitement and enthusiasm for a CX program. And back to the first question, right? Are we customer centric? When you start operating in that fashion, you build a culture of customer centricity, because now you're in the process of real-time listening, improving, taking action, tracking value, and going back and doing it again and again and again. And you build that internal momentum to keep that type of program running.
Yeah, that's great. And to that point, the answer isn't just throw AI at everything and it'll solve your problem, right? And I'm a big fan of AI, of course. We all are. But I think that what you're describing there is bringing experience to experience management. Essentially, that's the knowledge, that's the background, that's the expertise, that's the battle tested actions that you're taking, and what you're describing there, that kind of prioritization. Like if you think about it from the perspective of a coach, which in a lot of ways you and I are, right? We go into an organization and we are coaching our clients about the do's and don'ts and the priorities. And no coach says, here's 75 things to work on. That
Right.
just doesn't work. You got to get that priority going. And that requires that expertise. And I'll share a little something. Now, this was explicitly on the EX side of the equation, but I definitely think it applies to the CX side of the equation. There was a little known report that was actually put together by Everest Group from about 2 years ago, where they interviewed 600 CHROs and senior vice presidents of HR globally about their employee listening programs. And they all said the same thing. Two things. Number one, technology is absolutely critical to our employee listening program. Number two, it is necessary but not sufficient for creating great employee experiences. So we need expertise, we need advisory, we need consulting, we need project management, we need support to activate that technology. And I think, that I just summed up is really pretty much at the genesis of where VistaXM came from, more on the CX side. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Because that's, it's interesting. We talk to customers, they're what they tell us is, just tell me what I need to know. Right. And honestly, they don't care whether we're using AI or 1,000 smart people with sharp pencils and notepads. They don't care. Like, I don't care how you find it out, right? But just tell me what I need to know. I need to improve my business. I need to reduce churn. I need to get my customers, my existing customers, to spend more with me. And I need to close more business. I need to improve sales velocity. I need to reduce discounting, right? Et cetera, et cetera. That's my problem. That's my business problem. So tell me what I need to know to improve those metrics, those KPIs. And how you do that as a company, I don't care. Now, because we run enough of these programs, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'd love it if I could just put in technology and magically the answers would pop out. But no, it doesn't happen. Technology is essential. And we use a number of AI solutions. We use all the major SaaS platforms, depending on the customer and what we're doing for them. So we're kind of at the intersection of all of those tools, and they're great. But they're only great to a point. Like I said, they're great at getting the data, at organizing the data, at driving, allowing for the analysis and statistical analysis that we do to come up with those key insights. And in some cases, we're even using them for that ease and impact type analysis to kind of give us a starting point. But at some point, right, somebody has to manage that. That's a process. You need somebody who knows that process, who understands that. Even something as simple as, we talk about a survey, right? Sort of the gold standard of feedback, whether it's on the employee side or customer side. How you write a question, a survey question. There is so much science behind that, so much nuance. Everyone think, well, I'll just write a survey. I'd like to ask them this question. Well, depending on how you write that, you're going to get all, this, right? You're going to see all sort of biased results and all kinds of crazy answers. And so just, again, unless you have somebody who knows that, or you're going to go get a consultant who can help you with that, then it's garbage in, garbage out. And yeah, you have AI, but you'll just get garbage faster. So in those cases, that's where you've got to have that expertise. You have to have that people. You have to have the process. And then the technology is kind of what sits underneath to make it all work and work efficiently and cost effectively. So yeah, you need the tech, but without the people who know the process, who know the method, who've been through there and done it, right? Who've rolled up their sleeves and actually run these programs and run them well, you're just going to get a lot of noise. And that's ultimately we're going to collect. And we step in and run programs for other companies who've tried and they weren't happy with the results. And typically what we'll hear is, well, we tried, we ran some surveys, we got an NPS score of 14, blah, blah, blah. That's it, right? That's all we've done. And in those cases, that's absolutely the case of, well, we just bought the tech, we put all our contacts in there and we sent them an NPS survey with a couple questions. And we got 3% response rate. It was very noisy, very biased, and we can't do anything with it. So that's pretty much the case. And so we hear that all the time. We see that in our business, and we step in and fix that for our customers. But I think again, too much reliance on the tech. Now it's all on AI. Well, AI is going to do it for us. Well, what are they going to do exactly? Right? Are they going to sit down with your stakeholders in the business units and lines of business and say, here are the 2 things we have to prioritize. We need to make these a priority over the other 100 things that you're chartered with this year. No, they don't do that, right? AI doesn't do that. Are they going to manage a project? Are they going to make sure things get, is AI going to make sure things get done on time? Is AI going to, work with the stakeholders to demonstrate what the value was when sometimes we don't have all the data yet? No, right? You need people and you have to have a process and a method.
Yeah, I hear that for sure, and that's a really those observations are really great for the next question that I've got for you, and we are moving towards the back nine here pretty swiftly, Erik. So for the audience members, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like Erik to go a little bit deeper on, I encourage you to put them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to read those off as we get into the Q&A session here. The observation that you have about the expertise and something that you said earlier about, a lot of times you see the XM program getting maybe delegated downwards or sideways over to even like a marketing function. I want to scratch on that a little bit because one of the observations that I've had and several of my guests have had over the last, particularly I'd say year, is that the role of the CXO has just been evaporating. And so you tend to find that, to your point, maybe the IT organization now owns that, customer experience or employee listening program, but they also don't have the expertise that they need to really activate the licenses that they've just purchased. So what do you attribute this phenomenon to, just the CXOs kind of disappearing? And who do you now see as your primary partner in your client organizations?
Yeah, I'll answer your second question first. So right now, it's primarily a chief revenue officer, chief customer officer who we are working with. I mean, that seems to be where we're spending our time. I think, we talk about the rise and fall of the CXO. And, we see that with customers we're talking to every day. Where they had a big program and now they don't. They had a CXO and now they don't. And I think the big failure of CXOs, and I know this has been talked about widely, was customer experience did not translate to business. I always like to say we don't spend NPS points, we spend dollars. And when you're at that table, right, when you're at the chief anything table, you've got to be talking the language of business. So everything has to be translated to churn reduction, expansion, renewal, right? What matters to the business. And I think that's where we failed because we got so enamored in the CX world with, I have our NPS score went up 2 points. We were a 70 last year, we're a 72 this year. Okay, but our churn also increased 5 points. So what does that mean, right? What did that buy us? What does a 72 do for us? Unless you're using it as a marketing tool, it did nothing, right? And I think that was sort of the first big failure piece. And because they weren't CX teams and the CXOs weren't aligned enough with the business, they weren't able to drive the improvements and the fixes, if you will. So they were learning and getting the insights, but it was very difficult to get the lines of business and the stakeholders to operationalize that, because it was, hey, if you fix this, we can improve our NPS score by 3 points. And it just doesn't work, right? Because they're saying, I've got this initiative that's going to save the company $3 million. I'm going to do that before I buy you 2 more NPS points, right? That's the priority. And so that is, to me, that's been the big challenge of the CX world in general, is that lack of really tying to the business. And so, as times have gotten tough, right, as the economy is slowed down, hiring is slowed down, it becomes a cost center. Right, understanding the NPS score, a cost center, and that's how business are treating it. Right, they treat it as a cost center, not as a profit or revenue center. So it's not tied to revenue; it's tied to cost. So where does a cost center go? It goes into IT. Right, IT tend to look like as a cost center. So we'll push it into IT, or we'll push it into an operations function, where operations tends to look like a cost center, not a profit or a revenue center. So the leading firms and the ones again that I work with who see it as a revenue driver or a growth driver are putting it into CRO, CCO, right? It's part of a chief customer, chief revenue function. And so you can start to see how companies view it. Do they view it as a necessity, something we have to do, cost of doing business, because we got to get some numbers, right? Or do we see it as a really strategic entity that is truly going to grow the business and drive revenue, drive retention, drive expansion? And if so, it sits in a function that is also chartered with that, like a chief customer officer, chief revenue officer, because then it aligns very cleanly to the objectives of that function.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I interviewed famed Bain expert and Harvard professor Rob Markey, one of the co-creators of the Net Promoter Score. I interviewed him for my book, and he's a really interesting guy and really down to earth and really relaxed and just calm. And he's like, NPS, it was never designed to be a vanity metric. You're supposed to build a program and system around it. Stop just
Yeah.
quoting the score. It doesn't matter by itself, and for him to say that, it's like, I'm sure it's a little frustrating to somebody like him and Fred Reichert
Right. Oh,
who
yeah.
are like, hey, guys, you got to actually do something with this score. It's not just about reporting it, right? Um,
That's right. That's right.
so, what's next for VistaXM, Eric? Where are you guys going from here? So, you've been up and operating for about 2 years now, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where,
Well,
where, where are you going next?
yeah, so we're continuing to expand. We've got some global plays, being able to support some of the larger global companies running programs, multiple languages. We are one of the things we can do, which is pretty interesting, because we're a managed service and we run programs. It gives us the ability to run programs for ecosystems. Where, because we're running it the same way, we're actually getting a set of benchmarks that are truly benchmarks.
Mm.
And so, as you know, right, Qualtrics and all of those firms will publish literally thousands of benchmarks, and they're great. And my customers love to quote them. Hey, we're 72 on an NPS score against an industry score of 52 for tech, for example. And we start to ask the questions. Well, how was that benchmark calculated? Right? Did they send an NPS survey to every customer, every current customer, every customer they touched in the last 24 months? Well, we don't know. Well, if it's only current customers and you miss every customer that churned out last month or last 10 months or last 20 months, and shouldn't you hear from them because they churned out because they weren't happy, and that's not going to factor in? Oh, well, I don't know if we have to count them or not. Well, of course not. So that's the problem with benchmarks is it is so tied to the methodology and approach that you take to collect that everybody does it differently. We've seen lots of cases where people game the system. We have one customer that they have a bonus tied to an NPS score, an internal bonus, which is an absolute no-no. And so magically they hit the target every single year, and they can't tell you how, but they magically, are they getting better? No, but they at least hit their minimum target so that everybody gets their bonus component that is tied to that NPS score. So again, the methodology is really, really important, the process. And because we're able to do that consistently across ecosystems, we can actually get an ecosystem view and a set of benchmarks because we're able to do it consistently. So that is one of the areas that we're really focused on right now. And we're still heavily focused in the B2B space. And this has been a big gap, as you know, within CX. Most of the, when you hear CX stories, it's all B2C. And rightly so, right? But B2B is a different animal in that you've got multiple personas in the buying decision-making process. It's never just a one-to-one, right? If I buy an iPhone, I shop for it, I buy it, I install it, I use it, I get support on it, I do it all. But when you're in the B2B world, you have very different personas that are doing all of those things. So one person buys it, one person's a decision maker, you got a procurement team who goes through the contract, and you got an installation team, a setup team, an operate team, a renewal team that buys it again. So you've got to manage across multiple personas across a very complex customer journey. So we tend to focus on that sort of unserved B2B space, and we will continue to expand in that space because we definitely see a lot of opportunity. Because while you have B2B customers have fewer customers, end customers, these customers are much higher in value. Not uncommon, right? Some of these B2B companies have customers who are worth millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in one customer. So you think about the risk of churn of a single customer can be massive. So the ROI is very high on a solid CX program that can spot risks early and understand where customers are at risk and what needs to be done to shore up those customers. So we're going to continue to double click on that. We still do B2C. We have a couple customers in the B2C space that we support. but we will continue to focus probably more heavily with more solutions in the B2B world.
That's great. And remind me again the industries that you focus on.
Yeah, so we are, pretty much anything technology related. So we support a couple of the big OEMs and their ecosystems. And so that's kind of a primary area for us. We're also in the fintech world. We're supporting a number of big manufacturing companies today, and some consumer product companies.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So as we start to land the plane here, Erik, last question before I get to my wrap-up question. So and I think we've covered a little bit of this, but just more pointed here. When you reflect on the field of experience management, which is still fairly nascent as a domain, right? I mean, within the last 10 years, it finally got this moniker of experience management. But when you think about, in its early stages, what it was 15, 20 years ago, when you first encountered it professionally, what would you say are some of the biggest evolutions or trends that you've seen shift as of late? And what should practitioners have on their radar for tomorrow?
Yeah, I think kind of what we talked about is one of the big is the shift towards the business centric customer experience, right? And so we're almost now we talk about it in terms of customer experience is really revenue intelligence, right? At its heart, that's what we deliver is revenue intelligence. And because what CX does is it focuses and really helps you understand where revenue is won or lost, right? And it's won or lost at those experience touch points along the journey. And any one of those points could be a win, or it could be a loss for you from a revenue perspective. So CX really is revenue intelligence. And to me, that's the latest. We talk about aligning to the business, and if you boil it all down, that's what it's all about. And so I think as you think about new practitioners, the first thing is think about it in terms of how do I drive revenue? How do I become part of the revenue side of the equation in a business by providing insights and intelligence that were not available yesterday? And when you can do that, within a CX program, that's where you start to where CX programs really deliver value. And so to me, that's the first thing. And I think the second big evolution, and I don't know if maybe it's not an evolution, but look, there's always going to be a new technology. There's always some shiny new technology. It was SaaS 10 years ago, right? With the rise of Qualtrics and Medallion, right? The big SaaS platforms. And I got to go spend a boatload of money and get this big platform. Now it's all AI and agentic AI. And that's all you're going to hear about in, CX speak. They're going to talk about how AI agents can do all this great stuff. But you've got to move beyond the tech, because to be honest with you, you can deliver a great customer experience with no technology, right? You can just talk to customers. You can take notes. You can summarize notes, right? You do not need a single piece of technology to deliver a great customer experience program. It makes it a ton easier. It makes it cheaper. It makes it faster. Absolutely. But the minute you pivot away from saying, I need X technology in order to do this, you're going to be in a much better spot, because then you focus on the process and method, the outcome you're trying to deliver. Because it's really CX is all about the outcomes. It's not about the method. It's not about the process. It's not about the interim metrics, the CSATs, the NPS, the vanity metrics. That doesn't matter anymore. It did, because like you said, it is a new emerging practice. And we talked about that. Just like quality programs, it was all about, mean time between failures and defect rates. And we very quickly pivoted to, we used to have a quality department that sat in a room off on the side and did their magic and posted things on the wall. Very similar to what we did with NPS scores and CSAT scores. And we'd have a CX team that did it on their own and posted it on the wall, right? Now, quality is embedded in everything we do because it's part of the business, right? We don't think about it as a separate standalone function. CX is moving that same way, right? It is moving towards, it's part of the business function. So it has to be aligned to the business objective, which is revenue, right? Which is operating profit. That's what matters. So as I see kind of the next evolution, it's moving that way as an outcome, as revenue intelligence that is delivered by listening to customers and understanding customers and using the method and the science of customer experience.
Totally stealing revenue intelligence. Thank you very much. That is a nugget of wisdom that I hope everybody takes with them, because I talk until I'm blue in the face, right? About on the EX side of the equation, it's not about doing engagement surveys. It's about what you're doing with them, to get to where you need to be as a business. So, really valuable insights there, Erik. So, as we wrap up here, I always finish my podcast with what I call two things. So, if you could have two pieces of advice for practitioners of experience management today, one thing to stop doing or one thing to continue or start doing, what would those two things be?
Yeah, stop with these CX metrics. If I
Mm.
hear one more customer tell me, hey, we had an NPS score of 90, right? Look how well we're doing, right? Stop that. Nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares about NPS. There is such a small group of people who give a crap about that. Stop it, right? That is not helping us as a business process, as a function, as a corporate entity, if you will. So I would say, look, those are good metrics. Those help CX practitioners do their job. That helps us understand what's happening. But that, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of what the business cares about, those just don't matter anymore, right? No, again, I'll go back to nobody spends NPS points. That's absolutely the case, right? Nobody really cares anymore. NPS has been around, 23 years since Fred launched it. Or 24 years now, I think it's been
Mm.
since Fred launched the first NPS. And we still ask that same silly question, right? How likely are you to recommend this to a friend or colleague? And it's morphed so many different ways. Still the same question. Of course, 24 years ago, it was done with emails and spreadsheets, and that's why it was a simple question, right? It was built for the technology at hand. But now we have all this great new technology. We can listen to people's phone calls, right? We can do all this cool stuff that we never could do 24 years ago. But yet we
Mhm.
still ask that same question like that's some magical, mystical thing. Don't get over reliant on that, right? Really start, so what do you do more? Focus on the outcomes. CX needs to be an outcomes function, right? You've got to deliver the business outcome. That's what matters. Every business function that exists today delivers a business outcome. CX cannot be any different than that. It's not something special. It has to deliver a business outcome. So I would say, what to start doing more of. Steal Stephen Covey, right? Start with the end in mind, right? What is it? What is the business problem that CX is trying to solve for? Is it revenue? Is it operational cost? Is it efficiency? Is it retention? What is it, right? What's the problem the business faces? Work backwards to understand how CX can solve for that. Don't try to go the other way. We see this all the time. Hey, I got a CX program. What can I go fix? What's the use cases for Qualtrics, right? How many times, and you probably saw this, right? We go out with, hey, we got this cool platform. What can we solve for you? Look,
Yeah.
that doesn't work, right? Here's the problem. Let's work backwards into how CX can solve that business problem. And then how do we set up a program that addresses that, right? Versus let's go, we've got this cool hammer. Let's go find nails. No, here's the problem. Let's figure out how CX. So do more of that, right? Start with the end in mind, work backwards into CX and how CX delivers that outcome, and do less of relying on a bunch of metrics that honestly people just care less and less about.
Yeah. Fantastic. Words of wisdom from my friend Erik Vogel, ladies and gentlemen. Erik, I really appreciate you being on today's episode of the Customer Driven Leader podcast. How can people best get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way, just go to our website, VistaXM.com. And you can send me an email. I'm Erik at VistaXM.com. So it's ERIK at VistaXM. Easy way to reach me. Happy to respond to emails, all the emails I get, or just visit our website. A lot of contact options there as well.
Fantastic. Well, Erik, it's been great having you on. Thanks for being so full of really valuable insights. Really appreciate your time today, and really appreciate all of you who are actually on today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, this is James Killian signing off from the Customer Driven Leader. Thanks for attending, everybody.